So last week we kicked off a new series called Rhythms of Rest. Rhythms of Rest. And the one thing that I know is that as Americans, we go hard, do we not? How many of you guys work hard out there? How many of you guys play hard out there? Yes, this just kind of, it's bred into us that, man, we just go until we can't go anymore. But the reality is this, is that that is not how God has designed us. And that there's something wrong with this modern, life. That listen, the way that we live, it's not conducive to humans flourishing. And we talked about last week about this erratic and chaotic pace that we're running at. We kind of liken it to a speedboat. As you put that speedboat in the water, it sits down, but of course it's a flat bottom boat, so it doesn't go super deep, but it sits down as deep as it will. But as you start to throttle that boat up, what happens? That boat starts to come up, right? And it starts to shallow out. It starts to get up on top of the water. And then you end up with these air pockets. And as you keep giving it throttle, it starts bouncing, right? It starts getting a little bit violent. And if you just keep throttling that boat, eventually what will happen is it'll come up off the water, it'll flip, and it'll throw everybody out. And some of us, that's how we're living our lives, that we're following this chaotic pace of consistently throttling, full throttle, going full bore. And your life right now feels very unstable. It feels very shaky. And even in some ways, you feel a little terrified. You feel like, man, we're moving too fast. My kids are growing up too fast. I feel like I'm missing out on things that I should be slowing down for, but it doesn't seem to be part of our culture. And this is something that you need to understand. I have a thought that I'm carrying over from last week, and it's that this life was never meant to be lived at full throttle and used as a battering ram to break through the barriers of life on our own. See, often we live with this mindset, I'm powerful, I'm indestructible. And as we get older, we realize, come on, those of us who are a little bit older in here, we realize that we become more in touch with our frailties. We become more in touch with how delicate we are as a people, do we not? But we are told that we live life to the fullest. We go full throttle, leave nothing wasted. But I want you to understand that what it's doing is it's leading people to living a broken life. That people do break when you continue to run at a pace that is not sustainable. See, power and indestructibility was only attributed to God when you read the Bible. And in fact, what we see as a people is that he calls us or refers to us in the New Testament as jars of clay. Very fragile, very delicate. And he also refers to us in the New Testament as grass that withers and flowers that fall. So we understand that in this lifetime, there's something that you and I need to be mindful of, is that if we continue to run at a pace that is not sustainable, we will break. I've seen pastors, you see pastors on the news, right? They've had a moral failure and they interview them. And what is the thought usually? I was just going too hard. I lost track of time. I lost track of who I was. I was so busy and I forgot who I was. I forgot what God called me to do. And I just lost it. And for some of you, it's the same thing as your body may be breaking down. For some of you, morally, you're having failures. For others, it could be in the areas of your mind that you are so stressed in your mind that you can't even think straight. And so we've started this series with the understanding of this, is that God has woven rest into the rhythm of life. You see it in creation. God created for 6 days, and then on the seventh, what did he do? He rested. He could have created for 6 days and not mentioned anything about rest, but what he did is it was intentional about instituting rest as a part of creation. Maybe you're not convinced, but let me convince you. What happens every single night? You guys are captain of your own destiny, right? You're just running hard all day long, and then there's something that happens at the end of the day. You're like, oh, man, I'm tired. I got to catch some shut-eye. Well, God created us to power down in the night, that the sun sets and the moon comes up, and we go into this place of being what? Defenseless and unconscious. And what God is trying to tell you is that you have to slow down. That this pace that we're running at, we are out of sync with God's design for our bodies, God's design for our lives. That you were not made to run and to go 72 hours straight with no rest. In fact, what God's design for you and I is this, is that we move forward and we rest. And we move forward and we rest. We take more ground and we rest. That is the natural flow. But for many of us in this room, that is not our flow. We're out of sync. We're just like, full throttle, let's go. And it's going to cost you in the long run. And so this is why I just feel this is necessary. I feel like God's leading us into a season of learning to rest. What is the rest I'm talking about? I'm calling it the Sabbath. It's not just about a day. It's a lifestyle of learning to cease. It's learning to stop, just as God did. God worked for 6 days, and then he stopped. And we need to learn this rhythm. So last week's rhythm that we learned was that we need to slow down. How many of you need to slow down? Come on, let's be honest in this place. There's hands all over this place. So I know that I'm speaking to the right church this morning. So today we're going to continue in our series, The Rhythm of Rest, or Rhythms of Rest. And I have a message titled, Stress is Wrecking Your Rest. Stress is wrecking your rest. See, we're heading into this season right now where many of you are going to start to travel to see family. Some of you are stressed because maybe you need more money to, provide the Christmas that you want to, and you're going, the bank account is not cooperating. My job hours are not cooperating. There's no cooperation, and I'm starting to feel the pressure because I'm stressing because, there's a lot to do and not a whole lot to work with. There's a lot to accomplish without enough time. And so today we're going to talk about this, how stress is wrecking your rest. Am I speaking to anybody today on this? Yes, we are. So here's something that you need to understand is that God established the rhythm of rest. And what we understand is that because we're not resting, it's actually affecting us as a people. Recent studies, these are the studies of 2022. We understand that recent studies show that nearly 72% of adults, so that's 7 out of 10 of you adults that are in this room, on average, have experienced negative health effects or impacts due to stress. That's overwhelming if you think about it. It's an overwhelming majority of people that are experiencing things in their bodies and in their minds because of this thing called stress. It says this, that 33% feel overwhelmed, constantly feeling overwhelmed in your life. You feel like you're not getting enough rest. You feel like your mind, like you can't shut it off. Understand this. It's not just older people. It's also this younger generation. I was reading another statistic this week that was just staggering. Do you realize that our teenagers and our young people, on average, they touch their phones 1,800 to 4,000 times a day? Grab their phone and they're... We went to Disneyland this last week, and you just look at people in lines. They're not connecting with each other. That was the whole goal of going there, was to spend time with family. Everybody's like, they're with their friends, and they put their phone away, and then they talk for 3 seconds, and then, like the whole time. And this connection and this inability to disconnect from this so-called reality, what it's doing is creating this low-lying stress in so many people's lives, young and old. We see that 32% of people have experienced changes in their sleeping habits. So there's some people that are depressed, or some people that are so overwhelmed and stressed that what they do is they just sleep longer than they need to. They sleep in, or they go to bed early to escape this reality. And then you have the other group that are experiencing insomnia. They're up all night, they're flip-flopping, they're tossing and turning like a fish on the bed, Just, I can't sleep, picking up their phones. They're on their phones in the middle of the night. There's a lot that is happening. Why? Because of this word called stress. We have 30% that admit to worrying constantly. I don't know what they're worrying about, but they're worried. They're fearful about their future, maybe. Maybe they're fearful about their retirement, fearful about their children, fearful about their health, fearful about the economy, fearful about political things, whatever it is. But we understand that 30% of adults, these 7 out of 10, they're struggling with worry. And there's a whole nother group that's 15%. And if you add it all up, it means that some of these are overlapping. There's 15% that are using alcohol and other substances to try to find rest. Guys, we live in a society that is broken. We're living in a society that's fractured because of the pace that we're running at and also the stress that we're carrying. So there's something you need to know. Before like the 1920s, if you were to say, I'm so stressed out, people would have looked at you like you were crazy. They're like, what are you talking about? Stressed out. In those days, prior to, more recent times or this last century, the word stress was never referred to as describing the human condition. It was always referred to as describing the load that was placed on beams or other load-bearing structures. But somehow we've had to change the definition to understand that some of us are carrying these load-bearing structures that we are not meant to carry. And you understand that naturally, if you're placing or overweighting a big bridge or overweighting a beam or a floor or a roof, what ends up happening is it creates stress fractures that will then lead to total collapse. And some of you in this room, including myself at times, we are carrying too much for the season that we're in and that we don't know how to rest. So what's happening is we end up with stress fractures that lead to collapse in our lives. And this is the thought for those of you that are taking notes today, is that stress fractures people. Let me say it again, that stress fractures people. Think about it. When you're under stress, your character begins to get fractured. I've seen some of you, you are the sweetest people, you are the kindest people, but man, under stress, the claws come out, man. You know, when things aren't going your way and you're a little bit hungry and they aren't bringing the chips fast enough at Chili's, man, like something inside you wants to go off, right? And you start getting snappy with that waiter. You start getting a little impatient with that waiter. And they're like, hey, pastor, it's good to see you. It's like, whoa, hey. Stress is fracturing my character. Stress may be fracturing your character. You come home and you're like a tyrant, who left the food here? And who didn't pick up the clothes? And I'm always doing the laundry. That stress starts to fracture who you are as a person. And it's an indicator that you need to take some weight off. Because if you don't, it's going to lead to total collapse. I hope that this is making sense to you, church. So come on, we can give God a praise, not me. So I believe that today that God has a solution that he wants you to know about. And I believe that some of you are going to enter a new season of peace and rest. And as we talk about stress, what I want to do is I want to take you, if you have your Bibles, you can go with me to Luke chapter 10. You can go there on your phones, or you can go on the screens with us. But I want to take you to a very familiar story, but maybe you haven't seen it in this light before. It's a story of a woman who experienced a high level of stress while she was in the presence of Jesus. And I want to dissect this. I want to dive into this passage today and really allow the Holy Spirit to show us some things when it comes to relieving stress. We're going to talk about the sources of stress, and we're also going to talk about what's the solution to stress? What's God's solution, not man's solution. Somebody's like, just go on a vacation. And it's like, well, we spent $8,000 on the vacation. Now we're stressed when we got back. It's like, we're worse off than we were when we went or before we went. And so we want to talk about God's design for stress relief and creating a new rhythm in our life. And so we're going to talk about that. So if you would, go with me to Luke chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 38, and I'm going to go ahead and read this. So as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. So what an awesome girl. She opens her home to Jesus and his disciples. She welcomes them over. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. What an interesting statement there. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she came to him, speaking of Jesus, and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Is this sounding like some people here today? You're always leaving me to do all the work by myself. And he says, tell her to help me. And then we continue on. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Or indeed, only one. He's like, there's a couple. No. Just one. And he says, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. What an interesting thought. So we look at this story. Jesus and his 12 disciples, they show up to her house. And when I think about Martha, I think that often she gets a bad rap. It's like, she's just in there, and she's being bossy, and she's, just wants things her way. But in reality, I think that if you were a young single guy today, like this girl would be she's got her game together, man. She's at the top of her game. She's responsible. We see in scripture, she has her own house. Come on, man. And she's a hard worker. And not only that, I think that she's one who's probably outgoing and has guts. I mean, she sees Jesus doing miracles around the place and, sees that people are flocking to him. And she has the guts and the confidence to just walk up and say, hey, I love you guys, you and your disciples. Why don't you guys come to my house? So she's got confidence. She's got something going for her. And so we give her a bad rap often, but I think that in these days, we would probably applaud somebody that has these attributes. But as the story continues, what we realize is that she begins to become overwhelmed. As they're there and Jesus is in the room and Mary's sitting at his feet and listening to him, she's in there and she's cutting olives, making hummus and bread. And you could just see her, right? She's just getting more and more angry. Like, where's Mary at? And I'm in here and I'm doing all this by myself and they expect me to feed all of them. And man, and who's going to do the dishes? And, you could just see like her blood is boiling. How many of you have ever been in that place where you feel like you're the only one doing all the work and everybody else is out there laying on the couch, snoring and farting, and you're in there, cutting stuff up and making things, and it's like, oh, and you could just feel like her blood is starting to boil, right? And here's the thing to understand is that part of the stress that she was feeling is that she was putting pressure on herself that nobody else did. See, Jesus didn't say, hey, listen, Judas is like, he's my man, so talk to my manager, and when we come, he's going to send you a list of demands. He's going to send you a list of like a retainer. Like when, I don't know if you know this, but like when big bands come into town, their management sends out a retainer that they need this and they need that. So, it wasn't like Jesus was like, hey, I need a case of Avion water, 772 green M&Ms, goose down pillow. Like Jesus didn't do that. He didn't require anything of her. He was just willing and ready to come and commune with her. But here she is, and she's missing out on the opportunity to be in his presence because she's stressed out, working and doing things that nobody even asked her to do. And I think that some of us, in the same way, we do the same thing in our lives. That we find ourselves doing things and trying to fulfill expectations that nobody has even placed on you. You've placed them on yourself, or you have bought into cultural norms, and this is just what we do. When everybody comes over, I've got to clean every square inch of my house. When they come over, I've got to do this. And half of the time what we do is we miss the whole point. It's about communion. It's about friendship. It's about fellowship. And we get very, very much tied and linked to the doing instead of the being. That what Martha did and where she went wrong is that she was more concerned with what she was doing for Jesus instead of actually being with Jesus. And some of us, we do the same thing. We do the same thing. And so what I want to do is I want to take you through 4 sources of stress this morning. And I just believe that God's going to speak to you as maybe this is a little bit of a litmus test for you. It's a litmus test for myself that as I look through these things, I go, okay, God, where am I taking on stress? Where am I taking on pressure that you have never designed for me to carry? What is the weight? What are the things that I'm doing that's adding stress to where it's fracturing me and will eventually lead to total collapse? And I'm going to trust that God's going to speak to you this morning. So here's the first thing that we see as a source of stress is all that has to be done. That's the first area of stress. Many of you, you've got so many things to do. You've got so much that needs to be done. And we see this in Luke 10:40. It says, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And maybe you're living the same kind of life, just like Martha did. You find yourself stressed out because you have this endless list of to-dos that have to happen every single day. There's all these things that are coming at you and you're like, oh, I've got to do this and I've got to do that and I've got to be here and I've got to be there. And you just continue to add things to your life, add things to your schedule. And you're just like, oh, we can do it. I know we got like an hour here. We'll do this. And you are so stressed out because you continue to add things to your schedule because there's all these things that need to be done, just like Martha did. And you're placing demands on yourself that Jesus is not putting on you. Some of you are putting demands on yourself that nobody else has even put on you. Sometimes you're in a certain area of life and you kind of hear through the grapevine that these kind of people, they really respect this thing. They really respect that. And you find yourself being a man pleaser or a woman pleaser, chasing this idea of trying to please everybody, trying to impress everybody. I believe that's one of the things that stressed Martha out, is that in her mind, she's like, this is Jesus. I believe he's the Messiah. I believe he's the Son of God. And I believe that his disciples are awesome too. And so I'm going to cook this meal that is going to totally impress them. They're going to be blown away that when they come through, they are going to comment in the future that when we went to that girl's house, that was the best meal, the best experience, the best party we have ever had. And in doing that, she was putting this undue pressure on herself and this list of things that I have to do. And I ask you today, what are your have to do's? And perhaps a bigger question is, who said that you have to do it? Some of you are being ruled by the voices of a overly critical mother. Some of you are being ruled by voices in your life of a father that was impossible to please. And you need to heal. And you need to be restored so those voices are not bouncing around in your head and controlling your now. Those were things that happened 20, 30 years ago, but it's still influencing your today because you're not being mindful of the voices that you're listening to. So what are your to-dos? And who said that you have to do it? And there's so many people that are cluttering up their lives, following a roadmap and expectations of this world, and often forget to consult with God first. This is a reality. And some of you need to hear this today, that not all open doors are a God door. And not everything that is good is God. I see so many people, they're so stressed because like, oh man, look at this door that opened, and so I'm just going to walk through it, and look at this. Guys, God often, his way of protecting you and actually leading you is with more closed doors than open doors. And sometimes what we do as people is we chase the path of least resistance, just like water. And we claim that to be God, but we understand that this walk, this thing that God has us on this journey, it's not always easy. But many times we don't slow down to ask God, God, what is your plan? God, what is your best for me? What is your desire? And so we're just like, oh, well, hey, and we find ourselves overwhelmed because understand this, that if you start walking through doors that were not God's doors, then you have the responsibility to maintain what you found yourself in. Now, although God in his grace and his mercy and his compassion towards us will often uphold us and go, come on, let's get out of this room. You didn't belong in here in the first place. But often we will find ourselves trying to keep things alive in our own power that God never meant to come to life. He was like, that's old stuff, man. You need to let that thing die. And we're over there like doing CPR on this dream that we needed to let go of long ago. And that very thing, the work you're putting into it, is the very thing that is stressing you out, which is leading to a fractured character, which will then lead ultimately to a collapse. Second thing is this, is that feeling resentment. Feelings of resentment. This is a great source of stress for many people. And we see this in this passage with Martha. She becomes resentful toward her sister, and she's even resentful towards Jesus. Think about that. She knows that he's the Messiah. She believes he's the Messiah, and she's about to get testy with him. This girl's about to throw down on Jesus too, man. Listen to this. Because once again, what does stress do? Stress reveals those cracks in your character, the fractures in them. And listen, it says, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that she had to be made or that needed to be made. And she came to him speaking to Jesus and she says, Lord, don't you care? Like straight up just walks in the room, bam, with some attitude. Jesus, don't you care? So she doesn't even call out Mary first. She just calls Jesus out. Don't you care about me? That my sister has left me to do the work by myself? And she says, tell her to help me. She just walks in and starts blasting on Jesus. No, like telling the Son of God what to do. Come on, man, she's stressed. And for some of us, we're carrying the weight and the stress of resentment and bitterness. You started out on a journey with somebody. It was called marriage, and you had children together. And then now they said, till death do us part, and that person's not dead, but they parted. Come on, man, that's frustrating. And so here you are raising kids by yourself. There's this bitterness and this frustration. And it can create a weight and an anxiety and a pressure on you that can crush you and break you if you're not careful with it. There's people, there's marriages and couples that you guys, you're not getting along right now. There's a lot of stress. Why? Because there's resentment in the home. I'm the one that's always doing the laundry. I'm the one. Why am I always having to take off the trash? Why do I got to mow the cars? Mow the cars, mow the grass. Why do I got to wash the cars? And there's this resentment and this ugliness, and it's a pressure. It's stressing you out because some of you inside you started with such love, and there was like these sticks of fire that were rubbing, man, that started a fire. And now all of a sudden it's a fire that's burning down the house because you can't get along. Stress. The weight of resentment and bitterness, it'll take you out, church. And we need to find a way to get that off of us. Here's the third thing is distractions. Distractions. We see in scripture right here, it says, but Martha was distracted. It's interesting. I was studying that word distracted. In medieval times, they had this term called death by distraction. And what it was actually, I think the French, it was their way, it was a form of torture. And so what they do is they would tie a rope to all four limbs, and then they would tie those ropes to a horse. So you had 4 horses, 4 limbs. And at their command, the horses would then run in different directions and pull you apart, kill you through ripping you in different directions. And it's interesting when we look at this word because when we're distracted, that's the hard part. That's the stressor, is that you feel like you're being torn in all of these different directions. You feel like you're being pulled to the east and to the west, the south and the north, all at one time. And it's really hard to manage that. And some of you today, that is why you feel overwhelmed, is that you're living a distracted life, that you're being pulled in different directions. So my question to you today is, what's pulling you in multiple directions at the same time? What is it that you're doing that may be a good thing, but it's not a God thing? Because see, that's the challenge with distractions, is that a lot of times we're like, well, it's not a bad thing. Like, it was not a bad thing for Martha to cook a meal. Come on, that was not sinful. There was nothing about what she was doing that was sinful or displeasing, but what was displeasing is her heart. Her heart was displeasing because God knew that the stress was overwhelming her and that she was trying to do things that he never asked her to do. So that distraction was killing her relationship with God, killed the moment, killed the momentum, killed her peace, killed her joy. And some of you today, distraction is ripping you in all kinds of different directions, and you've got no joy, you have no strength, you have no peace. We got to figure out how to get that off of us. And here's the last one, is fear. It's fear. Let's continue in the verses. In verse 41, this was Jesus' response. So she says, go tell my sister to help me. Don't you care about me, Jesus? Like, I'm stressed out in here. I can't even see straight. She's got hummus all over herself and bread dough and flour and everything. And Jesus didn't say, hey, right on it. Mary, you little hippie, get off the floor, You little flighty girl, man, you're wasting your time. Get in there and help your sister. That would be most of us. That would be most of our response, right? Because we would see that as an injustice that one person was doing all the work. But the problem was Jesus was like, hey, I never asked you to do that. So why am I going to take her away from my presence and go make her work with you while you're over there doing your thing, stressing yourself out? But this was Jesus' response. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. And I think that today, if Jesus was here in this room and he was sitting one-on-one with each and every one of us, I think that this may be something that comes up in the conversation. You're worried and upset about many things. That you're allowing fear to control you. That you care too much about what people think. You care about missing opportunities. That if you don't jump on it and we don't get out there, we don't do this and do it right now and seize the moment and walk through the door, that this opportunity will never come again. Here's something you need to know, that when God opens a door, he holds the door open until you walk through it. And it's the enemy that holds it for a moment and lets you in, and then he closes it and traps you. But some of us have this fear that if we don't do it in our own power right now, that somehow we're going to miss out. We have this fear that people won't see us the way that we want them to see us. We care too much what people think. And that's where Martha went wrong here, because she was so worried about them enjoying the party and the food and the festivities that she forgot that was never a concern. Jesus just wanted to hang with her. And how many of us are doing that, even to our kids? We're running them around. We're running them ragged when all they want to do is just hang with you. A conversation at Starbucks or a ride in the car would be sufficient, but we got to be Disneyland dad, and we got to be Disneyland mom, and you got to go here and go there. And they're by the end, they're like, oh man, like they're stressed. Because we're trying to give them what we didn't have instead of giving them what we've got, and it's us. It's the same thing that God is trying to say to you and I. You know, I was recently talking to one of my mentors, somebody who pastors a big church and has just really been good for me as a young pastor. And I asked him a question the other day, and I thought it was a pretty tough question, but he answered with no hesitation. So I knew that this was who he was. This is something that he had embraced. And so I asked him, I said, you're running this successful ministry, and you have, a pretty chaotic schedule, and they have like 5 campuses, and they've got all this stuff, and they're always busy. And he just seems like he always is at such ease. Seems like he's always got joy, like he loves what he's doing, and the people love him, and he loves them. And I asked him, what's the secret to that? What's the secret to remaining in ministry and loving the people and being strong and being healthy, and you and your wife are healthy, and I can see that your kids love ministry, and they're all involved, and they're all doing this. And I said, like, what's the secret sauce, man? Like, what, like, how do you achieve that? And I thought that it was going to be something different than what he answered, but he answered right away, and this is what he said. And I want you to see this. He says, you have to become okay with letting everyone down. You're just a man. Mind blown. Because in all transparency mode for you, there's times that as a pastor and as a young pastor, I feel the pressure to be funny enough. I feel the pressure to be engaging enough. I feel the pressure to be available enough to people. I feel the pressure to do and to do and to do and to do. And there was something else that he said that just really put some things in perspective, and I believe it will for you today. He just said this. He says, love people deeply, but remember that our first priority is to please God, not man. So we love people deeply. I'm going to do my best to be a good pastor. I'm going to do my best to be engaging. I'm going to do my best to be available. I'm going to do my best to be warm. But listen, I will fail you. I'm just a man. And I have to be okay with that. And some of you in this room today, you have placed such high expectations on yourself to be Disneyland dad, to be the perfect son, to be the perfect daughter, to be the perfect spouse, the perfect parent. You are just dying under the weight of stress of trying to live up to the expectations of other people. But you will get free when you realize that you don't need to fear man and that God is your priority. Come on, that we love people deeply. We love them deeply. But my first priority is to God, and I have to come to grips with the fact that I'm going to let people down. Because I'm just a man, and so are you. And you're a woman. And you're going to let people down at times. But you have to be okay with that. You have to learn to not be ruled by other people's opinions. Because that fear becomes a trap. It's a snare to you. It's the very thing that is going to lead to fractures that will then lead to a total collapse. And I believe that God has better. So here's the question today. If stress is wrecking my rest, what's the solution? The solution is found in this story. In Luke 10:42, if you would go there with me. So after he tells her that she's worrying about a lot of stuff, he goes on to say, but few things are needed. Or indeed, so he says few things, and then he like, check. Let me just say this, no. Or indeed only one. He's like, no, actually it's not a few, it's only one. He says, Mary has chosen what is better and it will not be taken away from her. What did she choose to do? Let's go back to verse 39. Martha, she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. That is the answer. That is the solution to us overcoming stress. Is that not only do we build into the rhythm of rest, this rhythm of slowing down, instead of just, it's work and stop, work and stop. But what else are we building into the rhythm of rest? Sitting at his feet. That we stop caring so much about all of the tasks and all the people. Now, of course, we got to be responsible, got to go to work, we got to do these things. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about needless things. I'm talking about things that you're putting on yourself that nobody else is putting on you. You're packing the stress on you and then you're carrying it around as some badge of being a martyr. And God is saying, no, I want to release, I want to take that pressure off of you. How do we do that? We sit in his presence and we quiet ourselves before the Lord. So we're going to build that rhythm in. I'm going to quiet myself before the Lord. And what did she do? She says that I listened. He listened. She listened to him. She listened to him. What is God speaking to you today? Are you even slowing down enough to even hear what he's saying about a relationship that you're pursuing? Are you hearing what he's saying about education and career and raising kids, about ministry, about, philanthropy, about giving? Like, are you even setting time aside? Are you building that into the rhythm of your life to actually sit and listen? That was his desire. And Martha missed it. Martha missed it, and he says, your younger sister, the little hippie one, the flighty one with no shoes on, man, she's sitting, and she's done a good thing. She's chosen the right thing. So when we stop striving, we find refuge in his presence. We stop striving, we find strength through his word. And some of you, as you sit there, and it says that she listened to him, it's in that time of sitting that you learn to hear his voice. You learn to hear his word, and that begins to crowd out the words of other people. Can I just get a little bit of word in you today as we close out? Are you guys ready for this? Anybody want to get some word in your heart today? Come on. 1 Peter 5:7. This is what he would say to you today if you're stressed out. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. What a powerful word. Luke 21:19. It says, stand firm and you will win life. Some of you are living a life and you feel like you're constantly losing. You feel like you're on the short end. You got the short end of the stick. And what God is saying is stand firm in me. Stand firm in faith. Stand close to me and you will win life. Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. How many of you are out there fighting for yourself and you're so stressed because you're fighting for yourself? And God is saying, will you just sit down and be still and just watch me work on your behalf? Psalm 94, it says this, when anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought joy to me, brought me joy, sorry. And I understand this to mean this, that when you feel like you're overwhelmed, it's the words of the Lord that speaks to you, that brings joy to your heart. That when you feel like you can't go again, he comes along and says, listen, I'm here and I will strengthen you. When you're afraid, you are not alone. The one that created the heavens and the earth, the one that is all powerful, the one that is all present, I'm here with you right now. You're not alone. And as you begin to hear what God speaks over you, the Bible says that he sings songs over you, that God has plans for your life. You begin to allow joy to well up because you're hearing his words. His consolation means everything to us. Psalm 55 says this, cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. So you can know that whatever's coming against you, that if you cast your cares on him, that if you press into him, if you sit before him, what ends up happening is that he strengthens you and he makes you stable. So today, church, are you willing to build sitting in his presence into your rhythm of rest? Can we be a church that will add slowing down into the rhythm of rest? Can we be a church that adds sitting before the Lord into the rhythm of your rest?